day. So I really like the classic joke about the chicken and the pig. They were talking about going into business together. So the chicken says, "Hey, pig, we should open a restaurant." And the pig says, "I'm not sure what we would call it." And the chicken answers, "What if we called it ham and eggs?" This is where the classic joke is, right? Well, the pig doesn't like that idea. "No, I'd be committed. You would just be involved." So then the chicken counters. "Well, what if I'm committed as well?" And the pig says, "I don't see how you could be." The chicken explains, "We could open a place called Wings and Ribs." That's a little different, right? The pig answers, "Well, with both of us committed, I'm in." The big question about discipleship I want us to wrestle with today is, am I just involved with Jesus? Or am I really committed to Jesus? In our sermon series on discipleship, we've been trying to understand what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And we're realizing that obviously discipleship is so much more than church membership or church attendance, even though both of those things are important parts of our discipleship. Last week we explored the call of discipleship, and we learned that basically a disciple is someone who follows Jesus, right? Someone who is being changed by Jesus, and someone who is committed to the mission of Jesus. Today I want us to explore the cost of discipleship and come to realize that the cost of discipleship is more like the sacrifice that the pig makes in giving bacon than the chicken makes in giving eggs. Most people really like the Bible verse John 3:16, and for good reason, right? It's a great verse in the Bible. "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." An important verse, full of God's love and truth, but the simplicity and the brevity of that response, believe, is open to misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and minimization, right? "Oh, I believe, of course, let me go on," right? Those of us who are disciples of Jesus, we understand that believing in Jesus is much more than just a decision of the mind. It's a life of trust in Jesus, a life of obedience based on that trust in Jesus. You know, a verse in the Bible that we'll never see on a sign at a sports stadium, you'll never see someone with Luke 9:23. Maybe we should change that trend next time. Next time we're allowed to be in a sports stadium, right? Luke 9:23, get people to look it up. "If anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me." Let's spend a few minutes dissecting this important verse. And let's start with the first word which stands out in the verse, and that is the word anyone. If anyone would follow after me. If anyone wants to be a disciple of Jesus. The amazing truth that leaps off that page is anyone means anyone, right? Being a follower of Jesus is not an invitation for only some. It's open to everyone. No one's excluded from the possibility of being a disciple of Jesus. So it's not just for a chosen few, right? Discipleship isn't just for the elect. Discipleship is open to everyone. Everyone's an all-inclusive word, right? Anyone means everyone. No one's too good or too bad to begin following Jesus. So who's invited to follow Jesus? Everyone and anyone. People with an immoral sexual past? Anyone. People who have worshipped other gods? Can they follow Jesus? Yes, anyone. People who've been in trouble with the law, spent time in prison? Anyone. People who have failed marriages? Anyone. People who've been addicted to alcohol or cocaine or gambling or pornography? Anyone. What about other kinds of sinners and hypocrites? Yes, anyone can be a disciple of Jesus. So anyone means me and you and everyone else. Many people think the excluding factor of becoming a disciple of Jesus is someone's bad past. But you know, that's a lie of the devil, right? It's not about your past. It's about your present and your future, right? And as we continue to dissect this verse from Luke 9, we'll see the greatest excluding factor isn't a person's past. Is that person willing to pay the cost to be a disciple of Jesus? So the next important words are, wants to follow after me. If anyone wants to follow after me, or maybe your translations say, if anyone would come after me. This phrase describes a passionate pursuit. A passionate pursuit. Jesus wants us to understand following him is a pursuit that requires everything we have. Jesus tells this parable in Matthew chapter 13 called the pearl of great price. Maybe you remember that parable of Jesus. I think it's a good illustration of what Jesus means by a passionate pursuit of him. So Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field that a man found and reburied. Then in his joy, he goes and sells everything he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. And when he found one priceless pearl, he went and sold everything he had and bought it. Now, in biblical times, people would often bury their treasure, so to speak, in the ground. Not something that most of us do today, right? Our banks are pretty safe and things like that. It's a good place to store valuables. But not in that day, so they would bury it in the ground and it would be safe in times of war or other times. Of course, the problem is if you got to remember where you buried it, right? It's the problem with the squirrels out there. They can't remember where they put that nut, right? But anyhow, it was not uncommon for someone to bury their treasure and die and nobody knows where it is. Maybe die in war from some other cause, and they didn't tell the person where they buried the treasure. And so here's this guy in the story. He comes along on a field, and we don't know if he's a treasure hunter or if he just accidentally finds this buried treasure. What does he do? He reburies it and goes and buys the field so he can have the treasure in it, right? The person selling the field doesn't know there is a treasure buried there. If they did, the price of the land would have gone up, right? And so here's this guy he's liquidating all of his assets to be able to buy this field. And his friends and family are like, what's the matter with you, right? You know, that field's just a drachma an acre. Normally, what are you paying 100 drachma for, right? What's the matter with you? But he knew it was a good investment, right? And so the story of the pearl is similar. The same message is conveyed in the story. The person finds the priceless one, sells everything he has to be able to buy it. And so we discover that the life that we can have in Jesus, when we discover the life we can have in Jesus, Jesus wants us to act like the man who's found the buried treasure or found the priceless pearl. He pursues it with everything he has. Disciples of Jesus understand following Jesus is a pursuit that may cost everything, but it's the best investment a person can make. So once we get beyond the fact that the invitation is open to everyone and that Jesus wants it to be a passionate pursuit, we come to more of the real cost of discipleship. And that cost is he must deny himself. If anyone would come after me or follow after me, he or she must deny themselves. And in this phrase, we learn that discipleship really is a total surrender. We can't follow after Jesus without denying ourselves. So what does it mean to deny ourselves? Do we deny that we exist? Is that what that means? I don't think so. No, I think what it means is that we deny ourselves the right to do whatever we want with our lives because they're not ours anymore. We've turned our lives over to God. Now, it should be no surprise to us why discipleship and Christianity have fallen on hard times, right? In our day and culture, which is really all about you and your right to whatever it is you think you have a right to. Perhaps the story in Matthew 19 of the young man that we often call the rich young ruler is a good illustration of what it means to deny ourselves. So this young man, this rich young man, comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to be saved?" It's a good question. He asked the right person. And Jesus says, "Follow the commandments." He's talking about the Old Testament commandments. And the young man, proudly and with relief, says, "I have followed all of them since I was young. Is there anything else I have to do? Have I left anything else out?" And then Jesus says, if you want to be perfect or complete, and sell all your stuff, give the money to the poor, and come follow me. So that rich man was faced with a choice. The choice of following Jesus or keeping all his stuff. But he couldn't do both. He had to choose between one or the other. There was no way to follow Jesus without denying himself. Now, sometimes we make that story all about money. I don't think it's really all about money. I think it's all about following Jesus and the cost involved in being a disciple. Jesus clarifies the crossroads this man found himself at. He could follow that path of self that for him led to great money, or he could follow the path that leads to Jesus, but he couldn't do both. And all of us face a similar crossroads when it comes to following Jesus. One path leads to following Jesus. The other path leads to living your own life the way you want to live it. Living for self. Anyone who follows Jesus must deny himself or herself. So again, can you see why the call and cost of discipleship is at odds with American individualism? Our American culture of consumers tends to approach church that way too, right? What can Jesus and the church do for me? That's the big question. Whereas Jesus' call of discipleship says, this is what you must do for Jesus. This isn't about what Jesus can do for you. It's about what you are to do for Jesus. The modern church says, whatever you want, you can get here. Whereas Jesus says, deny yourself and give up everything. Follow me. So Christianity and discipleship are about Jesus being the king of his kingdom. And those who are his followers are the subjects of his kingdom. Jesus is the master and Lord, and we are his slaves. Now, I know slavery is an awful thing, right? And to have slavery forced on someone against their will is a terrible thing. To have their rights and choices stripped from them against their will is awful and is wrong. What if, on the other hand, a person chooses to be a slave or a servant of someone? You know, the great apostles who wrote the New Testament all called themselves by this term: a slave of Jesus Christ, a servant of Jesus. When we choose to follow Jesus, we agree to become his servants, his slaves. There's an interesting and wonderful concept in the Old Testament about a person who chooses to be a bond slave after serving for a specific required time. Deuteronomy 15, verses 16 and 17, the Bible says, "If your slave says to you, 'I don't want to leave you,' because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, take an awl and pierce through his ear into the door, and he'll become your slave for life." We sing that song, "Pierce My Ear," right? It comes out of that idea. So why would a person choose to continue to be a slave of someone after the required term of slavery? So under those ideas, a person might sell themselves into slavery to pay off a debt or something like that. Well, when it's paid off, that person could choose to continue to be that person's servant. Why would a person choose to do that? Well, the answer is because they love their master. They love their master's family. They're better off as a slave of that master than as a free person. And so in like manner, out of our love for Jesus and our knowledge that being a servant of Jesus is the best thing we can do for ourselves, we choose to deny ourselves and to be His slaves. And when we truly surrender ourselves in slavery to Jesus, that's when we find real freedom, right? That's the serendipity. Now, the Bible says the rich young ruler went away sad because he was rich. Now, that statement's kind of funny when you think about it, right? He went away sad because he was rich. He should have gone away sad because he made the wrong choice. He chose the wrong direction. He thought that denying himself all his stuff would make himself sad, but when we deny ourselves and follow Jesus, that's when we find real joy. Let's think about the blessings that come to us as servants of God. Our master owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That's what the Bible says, right? In other words, God owns everything. As His servants, He can provide for His servants, right? Our master has power over everything. He can protect us. Our master is full of grace and mercy. He forgives us. And our master is so gracious. He doesn't think of us as slaves. He adopts us as His sons and His daughters. Isn't it amazing how much better off we end up being by denying ourselves and surrendering ourselves to God? There's one more challenging phrase in verse from Luke 9:23. Take up your cross daily. If anyone would want to come after me, right, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily. As those who want to follow after Jesus, denying ourselves involves a daily death. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Christian minister, theologian, and martyr, wrote, "When Christ calls a man, He bids him to come and die." That's an amazing statement, right? When Christ calls a person, He bids them to come and die. And the symbol that represents Christianity and discipleship is the cross. Do you wish there was a different symbol for Christianity? Perhaps the dove. That would be a nice one, right? Peace. Or how about the rainbow? That's a great one. I love to see rainbows. That stands for promises, right? Promises kept and a symbol of hope. How about a shepherd's staff? That would be a good one. A symbol of protection and leadership. But rather than any of those symbols, Jesus chose the symbol of the cross and said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and pick up his cross daily. Now, we might try to sanitize that symbol, right? Make it into some kind of ornament or piece of jewelry, cover it with gold. But make no mistake about it, the cross is an instrument for torture and for death. For the Jewish people in the time of Jesus who heard these words of Jesus, the cross for them was the means of execution that the Romans were using as a way to keep them in submission. And when Jesus made that statement, the people heard and understood that the cross was a symbol of humiliation and suffering and death. Therefore, when Jesus says that his followers must take up their cross daily, he's inviting us to die to ourselves, to die to our own desires and our own pursuits and our own plans. As followers of Jesus, we must make the everyday decision. That's why daily's in there, right? The everyday decision to live for Christ and to die to self. And the cross we bear, it's not just some challenging situation or circumstance in our lives. And we hear people say that. That's just my cross to bear, right? And that's one way to use that phrase. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. Rather, he's talking about taking up our cross, turning over our whole selves and lives to God. C.S. Lewis put it this way in Mere Christianity. Christ says, "Give me all. I don't want to have much of your time or so much of your money or so much of your work. I want you. I've not come to torment your natural self, but to kill it. No half measures are any good. I don't want to cut off a branch here and there. I want to have the whole tree down. I don't want to drill the tooth or crown it or stop it, but to have it out." In 1 Corinthians 15:31, Paul said, "I die daily." And so should all disciples of Jesus. Every morning, a disciple of Jesus needs to crawl out of bed and to crawl up on the altar of sacrifice, die to self, and live for Jesus. In the next verse of Luke 9, Jesus explains, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and the gospel will save it." It's only by dying to ourselves that we find life. Taking up a cross and dying to ourselves sounds like torture. And we think such a decision would make us miserable. But it doesn't. When we do it, when we die to ourselves, when we take up our cross, we find the surprising effect of dying to Christ. We discover the true life, right? We find giving up our lives gives us the life we so desperately wanted in the first place. See, God knows how He's made us, and His plan is the best for us. So as we move toward the conclusion of this lesson on the cost of discipleship, let's look at another teaching of Jesus about the cost of discipleship from Luke chapter 14, just a few chapters later. "Now great crowds were traveling with Him. So He turned and He said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple.'" So this language of Jesus about hating our families, hating our own lives, it's disturbing language. It's troubling. But Jesus uses that language to get people's attention so they realize the cost of discipleship. Now, in reality, Jesus doesn't want us hating anyone, right? He's using an overstatement principle here. He doesn't want us hating our parents and our wives and our children. He doesn't really want us to hate our own lives. He's drawing a comparison between the kind of love we're to have for Him and the kind of love we're to have for others. And compared to the two, our love for Jesus must be so great it looks like hatred in comparison to the love we have for others. He must have that kind of preeminence in our lives. Now then Jesus gives two illustrations to aid our understanding as he continues there. "For which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, after he's laid the foundation and cannot finish it, all the onlookers will begin to ridicule him, saying, "This man started to build. He wasn't able to finish." Or what king, going to war against another king, will not first sit down and decide if he's able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is still far off, he'll send a delegation and ask for terms of peace. The story of the tower reminds me of a commercial on TV recently. The man sitting at this tattoo parlor, right? He's telling his love for Donna, and he's having her name put on his arm, Donna. And while the tattoo artist is doing his work, suddenly the man says, "Now, how much is this going to cost?" And he says, $50. And the man says, "I only have 41 on me." In the next scene, you see the man out on the street outside the tattoo parlor, and Donna's rushing off in a huff. He says, "Honey, don't worry, I'll get it finished later." And then the commercial turns to his arm and it says, "I love Don." Short a few letters, right? "I'll get it finished later." And so whether it's a tower or whether it's a tattoo, starting something and not finishing it is worse than not starting at all. A person better be sure they've counted the cost before constructing something. A half-finished tower is a worthless waste of money. And in the same way, we better count the cost of being a disciple before we start to follow Christ. If we start to follow Jesus without knowing or without really agreeing to the cost, we may get into following Christ and stop following Christ because the cost is higher than we're willing to pay. And then we're worse off in the end. Disciples of Jesus who will be blessed in the end must continue with Jesus to the end. The second illustration about counting the cost of war before you begin is a similar idea. If your opponent is much bigger and stronger than you, then you'll likely not win, right? And you might be annihilated in the battle. If you know you can't win, it's better to surrender and come to peace. And of course, it's an illustration of us against God. God is much bigger and stronger than us in every way. There's no way we're going to win against God in any form or fashion. And so it's better to accept God's terms of peace rather than being condemned eternally. And in the end, we realize that surrendering to God, receiving God's peace, is in our best interests and will lead to a better outcome than we could ever achieve ourselves. And so Jesus concludes there in verse 33, "In the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple." Billy Graham used to say, salvation is free, and it is. But discipleship will cost you everything. The salvation God offers to us is free. He's paid the price for it. But accepting it will cost us everything. Back in college, we used to do this skit in this spiritual skit group I was in about a person who wanted to become a follower of Jesus. And so they come to Jesus and they say, "I want to be your follower. I want to be saved." And Jesus says, "Great. All you have to do is bring yourself and everything you own and give it to me." And the person says, "Wow, that's pretty high cost. I don't know if I want to pay that cost." And they're kind of hesitant about it. But then they decide to do it. So they go and they get all their possessions. And they bring all their possessions and they bring themselves and they say, "Here it is. And here I am. I want to be your follower. I want to be saved." And Jesus says, "You're saved. You're my follower. Now take all your stuff and yourself and go home. It's yours. It's really mine, but it's going to be in your possession. Now, I may be by tomorrow or the next day, and I may need you or I may need your things, so you hold on to them until I need them." And that's the idea that God is the owner, right? God becomes our master and our owner, and our things are available to Him, as is our life. We become the stewards of the things that are God's, including our own lives. And so we can summarize the lessons that we've learned today with two questions. Who can be a disciple of Jesus? And the answer is everyone. And the second question is, and what is the cost of discipleship? Everything, right? Everyone can be a disciple, but the cost for everyone who wants to be a disciple is everything. So, if you're a disciple of Jesus today, I want to encourage you to examine yourself. Am I paying the cost of discipleship? Am I truly denying myself and picking up my cross daily and following Jesus? And if not, then Lord, how do I need to grow in this? If you're not yet a Christian, becoming a Christian is the best thing that you can do. And yet you need to understand there is a cost. And the cost is everything you are and everything you have in service to God. I hope that you'll make that choice if you haven't yet. But go into it knowing the cost, counting the cost.